Welcome everyone, Simon here from the Wales of Wall Street. We have an XDC video here for you guys today. This one's very much relating to the price action that we've seen with XDC in the market. Over 140% rise since those announcements a couple of weeks ago relating to the digitalization of trade finance documentation, certainly passed here in the UK by law and with the King's assent as well. Absolutely huge news that rippled across the entire trade finance remit, and of course as well for XDC in general, being so heavily involved in trade finance, has seen certainly the repercussions of this in a positive way. So we'll go into that in a bit more detail. Don't forget guys to smash that subscribe button if you are new to the channel or haven't done so already, and also please, if you can, smash that like button. Also helps the channel out massively. Thank you very much in advance. So guys, we're going to talk about this in a bit more detail. Now, around that time when we reported this update a couple of weeks ago, we've also had visibility of this article in particular, and it was quite interesting to read. It came out around the similar time. It's something I didn't see at the time, when I did that first video on this topic. But what's really interesting is something we spoke about on Lewis Jackson's channel, actually, in relation to do we see the UK as being a leader or becoming a leader in this kind of digitalization space, utilizing blockchain and AI, etc. And it comes a nice little statement towards the end, which we'll come to in a second. But there's some really interesting points in this article, and particularly something here. The UK economy is set to see over £1 billion boost over the next decade, with UK businesses enjoying huge cost savings. Now, of course, the amount of paper, the amount of time, the amount of labour that is used, whether it be customs related, supply chain management related, you name it, across the board within trade finance, a lot of money is wasted. And it's not necessarily always direct, it's as some of the points that we just made. But the conclusion here is that moving into this philosophy, this technology advancement, and applying it as law and the ability to actually utilize this in real world utility makes it extremely exciting. And we've always said, when we first started talking about XDC a couple of years ago, and certainly something I was adding to my portfolio more and more as time went by, XDC was kind of one that we identified as being really heavily orientated around trade finance. This came from a lot of representation through the TFID movements, or sorry, TFDI, I think. Get that right in a second. We'll go on to that in a moment. Of course, Andre Castman, a huge member of that aspect, and pulls in a lot of narrative around XDC's network, or Zimfin network in general, which is really exciting. And it's even more exciting to see that development come into a bit more of a reality. Now, as this article suggests, out of all the G7 countries, all the big, huge countries out there with big GDP, and ability in the world from the economic perspective, sorry, I get my words out in a minute, it is one of the leading moves here, certainly coming from the UK. Other countries are catching up. We'll go into that in a moment's time as well. But we're paving the way for something really, really interesting from an investor's perspective. Now, we've seen the transition of the XDC price going from those sort of 2-3 cent marks all the way nearly up to 10 cents last night as of recording. And that's just from the UK's movements. Imagine what will it be like when the rest of the world takes note and starts delivering this information as well. Now, it's very important to understand that this isn't something that has been talked about just overnight and they've clicked their fingers and it's done. In fact, actually, this goes back certainly from the digitalization aspect in trade finance to at least 2017, when it was talked about officially and became a proper conversation within parliamentary levels and government levels worldwide. So we can see this article here from 2021, the UK G7 presidency roadmap to reform for electronic transferable records. So it's something that's been talked about for a long, long time. Loads of information coming out of here. MLTER, of course, is very heavily involved in this, and we'll talk about that as well in a second too, because it all really relates to each other and shows the progression that we've made under blockchain technology all the way back from 2007, when Bitcoin was supposedly found miraculously, to our today's world that we see, where integration and adoption is finally occurring. And this can only be a really good thing when it comes to investing in crypto, and particularly, in my opinion, more of the trade and more of the finance related tokens that are being utilized for their systems and frameworks that companies will jump into and utilize these for creating their business models and solutions. It's really exciting to see this development, guys. So looking back as well, XDC really prominently positioning itself as a trade finance solution, trying to save companies money, even governments money as well. And from that trade gap perspective, the gap represents the difference between the two is ballooned to $1.7 trillion in the year 2022, aka last year. Absolutely massive numbers here that we need to try and reduce. So this is where we get to the points here of all the different solutions that XDC is going to essentially eliminate in terms of problems that we have in the existing systems, and putting something in there that will really define trade finance moving forward. So for me personally, when I'm looking at all of this, and I've said this multitude of times, when you're investing in a project, of course you can be speculative, you can do it on word of mouth, but honestly, please research the companies that you're investing in. And my little story behind that is when I was starting to invest around that sort of 2019, 2020 mark, of course we had a few drops there. And when I was investing, I see a lot of price movement, but I was like, what am I actually invested in? And that's why I took a bit of time to go and do a diploma in blockchain cryptography, and understand a hell of a lot more about what I'm actually like invested in. What is my money actually going into here, rather than just looking at charts and say, oh, I might make some money here. What is it? And when I started identifying all of these areas, certainly in different sectors and industries, especially ones that I've worked in, they always say invest in what you know. I think that was a Warren Buffett comment that he made many years ago, and it's so true. As I said, of course you can have speculative investments, but it makes so much more sense if you have the time, or some time at least, to go and research this, because I love looking at data, I love looking at numbers. It's absolutely phenomenal. XDC Trade Finance in a nutshell. This is a very massive number here, over $10 trillion worth trade volumes represented by trade finance, guys. This is the market value. That's not to say that XDC is going to operate that entire amount of market share, but it's certainly going to take a huge proportion of it, because it's already in everyone's minds at that level. And when we look heavily into the TFDI, so this is about the Trade Finance Initiative, we can see way back 2021 indeed, where XDC was actually at the time the only blockchain signed up as a member of the TFD initiative. So new technology-based market practices and transaction data specifications with the goal of increasing accessibility and transparency of trade flows. Absolutely huge, a big, massive rendition here about XDC in general. But my point being is that this is, again, not something that's happened overnight. It's been in fruition for a long time, and we're finally seeing, the fruits of it. The reward of our patience and our belief in this. And we've always said, and many people in the comments have always said, this is under the radar project and token. We said that for a long time, and that's fine, because a lot of the other projects out there were exactly the same when they started out. It was only when awareness started kicking in, when some form of utility or awareness has been coming out. So as soon as these articles have been coming out, especially from the UK government, and that royal assent approval, people jump in. And this is why the next big bull market, probably in around 2025 or leading up in 2024, is going to be so huge, because more and more people are going to understand digitalization of everything, tokenization of everything, and then they're going to come in and go, what is powering all this stuff? Getting research, watching videos, listening and reading articles, webinars, etc., and it will just fly. And I truly believe that once the world starts switching on their trade digitalization finance agreements and laws, XDC will pump up even further. I don't know when that will be. It could be weeks, it could be months, but I can imagine that it's going to be very soon, because many countries won't want to fall too far behind the UK when it comes to their powering forward of this development. So one of the final points here, of course, the MLETR, this is absolutely massive part of the framework for pretty much every organization, government, etc. around the world, is very, very heavily involving itself around this bills of lading, promissory notes, the whole aspect of digitalization in trade finance. We talked so much about supply chain management as a great example, where we're talking about the transparency, the verification, the processing, the integration very soon, guys, if not already being trialed, with artificial intelligence, supply chain and demand being done on AI algorithm based on real-time data. But for that to really enhance and really speed up as much as they want it to, of course, you're going to need the technology like blockchain to process everything so quickly, those transactions particularly. But then you're not going to be able to do that if you're still messing about with pieces of paper, which is why digitalization in general is not a new terminology. Digital aspects have been around for 15, 20 years predominantly now, and have increased their technological advancements significantly over certainly the last 5 years. And with the integration of blockchain technology, AI integration as well, it's going to absolutely explode the world trade finance market, and certainly the revenue abilities of it as well. You can see here, engaging emerging markets. We've also got the G7 economies that I mentioned here, but countries like Papua New Guinea, Belize, Kiribati, Bahrain, Paraguay, Abu Dhabi, to name a few, have already adopted the MLETR processing. India, with the framework of the G20, has expressed preliminary interest. Once this all happens, guys, this will be in the next couple of years, in my opinion, because it heavily relates to the RTGS switch over in November 2025. There's this whole conversation about ESG. All companies will have to adhere to these policies for the climate change initiatives and narratives, and certainly, especially within supply chain. And when we talk about that, it's ironic that a lot of the members within trade finance are heavily related. For example, these guys here, hopefully I got it right, Coriolis, heavily involved in ESG scoring solutions. This will all be backed by blockchain in terms of transparency, verification, processing, etc. It will also dictate potential cost mechanisms. Oh, your company's not ESG compliant, or it's not got a great score, therefore you will be charged more. And it will initiate people to be even more savvy when it comes to their environmental impacts and sustainability. This is how it all works. When you talk about CBDCs in general in the framework in a couple of years' time, that will also have the programmability to adopt initiations that will essentially dictate not just for businesses, but us, the general public, to enhance us to do things to ensure that we get the reward, or we're able to do things. And that sounds pretty crazy, but that's just how it's going to work. It's absolutely mental. But on this side of the coin is that there is still much more work to do. These laws have been passed. The frameworks are relatively there, but now it's really defining the regulation, and especially with AI. If we note as well the documentation that came out over the last couple of days, certainly here in the UK government, where the regulation of artificial intelligence is really accelerating. And it's a really interesting time, guys, to be alive. It's scary, but it's also exciting, and it's definitely a giant opportunity as an investor, and certainly something that I'm kind of excited to an extent to see how that develops, certainly from the investment perspective. Not so much maybe the integration of some of these things. It's going to be pretty weird, but of course the next generation after us, they will just see all this as normal anyway, despite some potential warnings from ourselves. Who knows? Of course, like most chains do of course have smart contract application. If they don't, well, that would be quite surprising. But of course, the MLETR aspect of things, so this is, for those that don't know, the model law of electronic transferable records. It's always loads of words in these things, isn't there? So just a nutshell, aims to enable the legal use of electronic transferable records both domestically and across borders. As I said earlier, it's not new information. It's not a new project. It's been in circulation, certainly a minimum of at least 6 years as a talking point at that parliamentary and legalised aspect level. But of course, moving forwards 6 years to today, pretty much, or a few weeks ago, seeing that development, that approval process coming into fruition, being signed off, is a massive, huge step. We are literally on the brink, guys, in the next couple of years, as I said just a moment ago, of seeing some significant adoption utilizing AI and blockchain. And certainly for the trade finance markets, which is obviously one of the most gigantic markets there is in the world, because you can imagine everything that you buy and you sell is heavily related to trade finance. Even commodities, materials, food, produce, you name it, all heavily related. And there's a multitude of reasons why this is such a huge development, of course, but then what we've got in terms of the end user, when we're talking about ESG, sustainability, we're talking about the ethics of things that we buy. For example, we can see everything. We'll be able to see everything. And that whole transfer of a commodity or an item going backwards and forwards, and even to the point where we could see, where did this rice come from? Did the people that harvest this get their reward, or did they get paid fairly? Whereas at the moment we're just going on pieces of paper or what's being wrapped around chocolate bars and stuff to say, yeah, this is trade friendly, etc., taking their word for it. We'll be able to see that definitively. That's just one example, guys, of the power of blockchain in that supply chain mechanism, trade finance. But the ultimate goal, really, if we look more conclusively at it, is to save the economies a lot of money and make a lot of money. And this can help so many developing countries as well. It's really going to define and level up a lot of countries that perhaps falling behind, whether it's over the last few years, decades, maybe even a century, who knows. It's going to be significant change, guys. So those points must hopefully resonate with yourselves. As I said earlier, please do your own research on these projects. It's really important, in my opinion, when you're investing, to understand what you're investing in and understand the opportunity. The education behind it is really important, just as much as knowing where the price points are in the market and to see what's coming. Because now this is all into the open now. As I said, I can expect, as I said, I don't know, it's days, months, whatever. Once the rest of the world starts turning on their law application towards digitalization of trade finance, things like XDC, it's not the only one. We cover things like VeChain in supply chain management, etc. There's going to be many other chains that follow this process. But honestly, in my opinion, XDC is going to see some extreme prices in the future, for sure. It's still under the radar, irrespective of the last few weeks worth of news. There is so much more to come. Let us know what you think about that in the comments. Do you agree with that? Do you disagree? Where's your price point in your mind, where you think we could get to over these sort of like next couple of years towards 2025? I'm certainly anticipating at least a minimum between 50-70 cents in that next big bull run. But if these agreements continue and the world adoption continues, we could see way beyond that. But that's probably a bit of a conservative selection from my part. But I'm just going based on data, of which we will go through right now, in terms of its price points and where we could potentially be going from today. So looking at this, guys, as you can see, 28th of July, around the 20th of July is when we started seeing the increase based on that news articles and the information and media outlets pushing that information out, that the King's Assent and approval of law passing of digitalization of trade finance. Since then, we have seen over 140% growth in XDC. I'm just going to remove this price range quickly so we can see a bit more detail. So as of yesterday, we hit the dizzy heights of around 9.4 or 9.5 cents potentially, or certainly some markets were pushing that. On here, I believe it shows about 9 cents, but literally this morning around 2 o'clock, it did hit around that sort of 9.5 mark as well. So absolutely huge gains from that perspective. But of course, what has matched up is where we drew these points in before of target areas, simply based on a short-term fib retracement, but also looking at data on some of the mid-ranges as well, and data points from the past. So we pull this out a bit, we can see there's always been a bit of volatility in the past, not huge amounts, but certainly great data points here, last seeing January 2020, where we see these areas that we have been attacking the last 24 hours in the XDC price point on this chart. We also identified these lower areas where you could just about see a bit of volatility over a sort of week and a half period. So the data is very much on point with what we've got here from the fib retracement levels. They're not always fully accurate, but they at least bounce around those particular areas of interest. What can we expect in the shorter term? Well, this is where it can get quite interesting in the sense, okay, we can take our last higher points of interest and project those based on some of the most recent lows and highs and some of the last recent highs that we saw perhaps back here in January. We can identify that potentially the next areas of interest, of course, the 10 cent pretty much is a rounded number, and then going up way beyond that to touch the 12 cent marks. That's a bit of a long shot at the moment. I think we've had such an increase there's probably going to be needing some kind of movement like this. If we are going to take it forward, you would probably see a small amount of action over the next week or so at this sort of 8.5 to 9.5 cent mark, maybe just touching that 10 cents again before we project ourselves upwards. However, there's also the anticipation, of course, of potentially buying or DCAing in lower opportunities. I, in my mind, have probably got most thought process around the fact that we will probably retrace back down to these areas at some point, unless the institutions and big enough investment has come in to say, we get it now, we understand the awareness of XDC, we understand what XDC is capable of, we understand what's coming in the markets and the agreements worldwide, that actually these price points might stay as they are. It's a bit of a risk thought process, because you have to look at the previous data and say, well, actually, we haven't got enough touch points at these lower areas to confirm that these are support lines. So there will probably be some volatility over a long period of time at these lower areas again. We'll have to see how that plays out. But that's why I personally always have my limit orders at lower areas and various areas in general. But I'm enjoying the ride up for sure. Certainly when I was buying this back down at the sort of 2-3 cent mark earlier this year, we're seeing good progression, of course, on that, and I will take out some small percentage positions out of that 10 cents and then see what we do. If it moves forwards, brilliant. I will probably reinvest it back in at the lower regions, because for me, I'm XDC long term. I'm not interested in taking profits or anything properly into my bank accounts or anything like that for a long time until we see real reward. Because if we remember, back in 2021, the previous all-time high at 20 cents. That is definitely a big marker for us to attain towards that 2025 mark. But as I said before, I do honestly believe that we could get to that sort of 50 cent mark as a minimum in that next bull cycle. There's a long way to go, but you can see why that is possible with all the things going on, with all the knowledge and information that we've just spoke about, is really going to reflect those price points in the future. As of now, if you're new to XDC and you're thinking, mate, jump in, just be very wary that we're obviously on these high points right now. At the moment, the 28 days showing 78, the 14 days showing 81 here on the relative strength indexes. This is too high for me personally to be like, wow, I'm going to jump more in. Remove the emotion, be more strategic about it, be patient if needed. Even if you were to just wait for that stability over a week's period for a DCA opportunity. But even then, just as I said, the data points, in my opinion, reflect that we should probably be seeing some lower areas at some point. And of course, it will tail back up when the news ripples across the world in the near future, when other countries follow the lead of the UK as well. It's coming for sure. We just don't know when, but we just got to prepare ourselves at these various stages. In the long run, if we're looking at 50 cents a dollar, of course, you could argue, I don't care whether I'm buying at 10 cents or 5 cents, 3 cents, 20 cents. There's long aspects towards this project and this asset, certainly from a market value perspective.